content of the following program, including all statements from the hosts and guests, is to provide general information and commentary about the law. Under no circumstances does any statement made by the host or guest to a caller or listener constitute legal advice or the formation of an attorney-client relationship, and the material from this program shall not be viewed as substitute for a personal consultation with an attorney. Now, prepare yourself to be informed and entertained by Gus Bravo and Neil Conci, two AV-rated trial lawyers who have been practicing law for a combined total of nearly 40 years. For the next 30 minutes, they will share their insight and commentary on important legal issues affecting all of us.
A young lawyer sitting in his office, and his senior partner comes up to him and says, "I've got a job for you. You have to go to our new client who runs a farm out about 30 miles south." And the young lawyer says, "It's 110 degrees outside. You want me to get in my car and drive to this farm and talk to a farmer?" And the partner says, "Yes, I do." And the young lawyer, agonized, gets in his Mercedes and he drives down to the farm, complaining all the way to his wife on the cell phone how hot it is and how he can't stand the heat. Finally, he parks his Mercedes at the farm and he steps out of his car and he steps right into some cow dung. And he looks down at his shoe and sees the dung and he says, "Oh my God, I was right. I'm melting." Welcome to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil.
Man, that was, if there was like a trumpet, I would be like, wah, wah.
You know, every now and then I'm going to have a bad joke that's just funny because I like it.
That one melted in the same way you described it. It just completely melted away.
Right.
And I'm Gus Bravo. I'm sure I'm going to laugh eventually.
Eventually,
That's
yeah.
one of those that is funny because it's so stupid.
Exactly.
Right? It was a little longer. That's the other thing, too. It takes a little longer to get there. But other than that, I really enjoyed the joke.
So,
so for those of you who've been watching intently, this is complete different time. Actually, it's about 3 minutes between the shows. I changed jackets, put on a tie. You actually stripped down, and it looked like you changed completely.
yeah, just a new shirt. Just,
Okay, just correct me when I said stripped down. You left me with the visual. It's like, you should have locked the door. So last show we were talking about the interplay between law and morality, and I think again this is a topic that we can spend a lot of time on, and I think it's important because we both believe it's important. Obviously, there have been some significant social changes last couple of weeks, certainly within a month,
absolutely,
and in different ways. You know, you have obviously Supreme Court getting involved with gay marriage, then you have the Confederate flag, not a legal thing, it's just a political pressure and social pressure to take down the flag from the state capitol, which again did not involve any violation of any laws, right? It's just something that the government, I think you're right, didn't have the obligation to do that, but it
chose to do it, and I think rightfully so.
Right.
I mean, I think that it's a long time coming and probably should have been done a long time ago.
Right.
I mean, the Confederate flag, it probably is very similar in mind to African Americans as the swastika is to Jewish Americans. And you don't see a lot of swastikas flying around
I mean, it
in
was
the United
pretty
States.
compelling to me when they saw the parade that they had, the people there when they were taking it down.
Absolutely.
So it's a symbol. Again, we're not saying we agree one way or the other necessarily with the politics. Again, one of us is right, the other one is wrong. But I think the idea is to show the interplay between law and morality. That's an example where law, rightfully so, did not get involved because it shouldn't have gotten involved with that, as opposed to the Supreme Court example where the law needed to get involved, whichever way of the side of the coin.
Exactly, and I think the gay marriage decision, we're seeing interesting play out on that now because states are trying to address it in their own way by putting all these religious exemptions in and saying that if you're a justice of the peace and you have a religious
So we'll
objection,
see a significant legal, landmark legal event. Now we see the reaction in how society starts to adopt and starts to adapt to that event because change,
absolutely,
it's change.
And a perfect example of that is, and although there's no automatic correlation between the two, but it seems interesting that they happen at the same time, is we've talked about the gay marriage ruling. Well, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, just this week, and for those of you listening to the show, it'll be about 2 weeks old, but just this week issued an opinion.
We could apply this in August, September,
exactly.
November.
Issued an opinion that gay and lesbian discrimination against gay and lesbian community is protected under the EEOC anti-sex discrimination clause. That is entirely new. There are courts all over the country that have said exactly the opposite. And whether the courts adopt the EEOC new interpretation guidelines is still to be seen.
So there's...
But what you have is the Title VII, which is the law that protects people in employment from being discriminated on the basis of race, national origin, sex, age,
gender.
Well, I said sex. I usually say gender, so sex. But what happened is.
But that's actually an interesting.
Right.
It's now an interesting legal question.
Well,
because the difference between the word gender and sex.
In 2012, the courts agreed that transgender was protected
under
as sex discrimination.
Okay.
If you discriminate against someone that's transgender, you're discriminating against them on the basis of sex. Sexual orientation. Some of our circuit courts of appeal have held that that is not discrimination on the basis of sex, because if you discriminate equally against gays and lesbians, you're not actually discriminating against them on the basis of their sex. You're discriminating against them on the basis of their sexual orientation, which is not covered by the statute. At least that's what the courts had held. EEOC has taken it now the next step.
Yeah, you see that where that's going to be linked up.
Right,
How could
exactly.
You not?
Well, exactly. So the EEOC has now made a position statement that they believe that sexual orientation is covered by Title VII. So now you're going to see a whole new line of laws and court cases where people are going to, the EEOC is now going to find that if there's sexual orientation discrimination, these people have a right to go to court, and then the courts are going to have to address whether they believe the EEOC accurately interpreted the statute.
And we're going to jump into the gay marriage more in depth in a second. And I think the third topic that we also have been talking about is Title IX. And this is an example that we used the U.S. Women's National Team as an example of here's a landmark event that happened 33 years ago. And now you see the fruits of that labor, so to speak, right? Because I think many would argue, and I think chief among them would be the soccer players themselves, the female soccer players themselves, that without Title IX, without that change in the 70s, when a lot of these little girls were now just starting to get a chance to play sports, right, and get college scholarships, that became a possibility for them. Only then did they start to dream about bigger things, having a professional league, having a World Cup. I mean, and those were monumental changes. And now we see what that has meant. So that's an example of a landmark event, and you see how it's played out now. We talked about earlier about some of the unintended consequences of it as well, is that some lesser heralded, obviously less profitable men's team sports or sports have suffered, are no longer part of the college spectrum. When I was graduating in 93, I'm not going to ask you what you were doing in 93, what law firm you were working for. You know, there were very few options for us as a soccer player to go play college soccer. None of the three state schools, or the big three, so to speak, had a men's program. The closest one was Central Florida and South Florida, both obviously Tampa and Orlando. Me being a mama's boy, like my wife likes to tell me, I didn't want to depart too far from home. So down here, you had very few universities, and frankly still, that offer men's soccer scholarships, because I don't have a team. FAU has a team finally, so does FIU, and then Nova and Lynn, some of the other schools.
All part of the Title IX issue.
Right. And so when I was a kid, I didn't look at it necessarily as a positive, because my own personal experience was, the men's soccer programs have suffered, but the reality is they shouldn't, right? One has nothing to do with the other. You should have women's soccer. You should have women's lacrosse. You should have women's basketball. You should have these kind of sports, right? And you should support them. But they're making so much money, they being the NCAA, from football and basketball. How do they not fund these other sports is beyond me. But anyways, so these are examples. I thought the three things. You have the gay marriage opinion, Title IX. These are two landmark legal events. One, we see 30 years later, we can look back and see the effects of it. The other one we're just dealing with now. It's only going to get more interesting as how society adapts to that change, right? And what other changes are on the horizon. And then the third one, the Confederate flag, is more of an example of a political, social movement that the law just stepped back and said, this is how you decided. And I think the interplay between that is interesting to me.
Absolutely. I think that the flag issue plays in the classic example of 99% morality, 1% legal. Should there be a legal debate over banning it or other issues? But it's really a moral decision. Gay marriage is probably about as close to the 50-50 split. There's definitely a moral issue there because these are people who love each other. They should have the right to marry. And there's the legal issue for the very same reason, that legally you can tie that into the constitutional protections that should be offered them.
And to be clear, we spent a lot of time talking last time about was it Roberts' dissenting opinion,
right?
And not enough about, I think, Kennedy's majority opinion. And I think, when we come back, because we got a minute before we're the break, I think we can talk a little bit more about Kennedy's opinion and also some of the constitutional arguments, the winning constitutional arguments that were made, but how that also could be a slippery slope. That where do you draw the line?
Exactly.
So we're going to talk about polygamists and bigamists, right?
Exactly.
To make it more interesting.
And then I think we're going to go to the break now, and then when we come back, that's what we'll talk about. You're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil.
You stole my line.
I know. I wanted to do that.
Amazing.
Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil is being brought to you by the law offices of Neil D. Codsi and Bravo Law. Bravo Law is a business litigation firm known for providing common sense solutions to small businesses and individuals throughout South Florida. Mr. Bravo is rated AV by Martindale-Hubbell and Superb by AVVO, the highest ratings available from these two entities. The law offices of Neil D. Codsi is a litigation boutique with offices in Broward and Miami-Dade counties. Mr. Codsi is a veteran trial lawyer with nearly 25 years of jury trial experience. He is also a two-time recipient of the South Florida Daily Business Review's Most Effective Lawyer Award, a recipient of numerous awards for providing pro bono legal services, and has been recognized by the National Law Council. Call our office, 786-464-0841 or 954-790-6711 and get informed. You're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. If you have a comment, question, or just want to contribute to the conversation, call the show at 888-565-1470 and share your thoughts on what's going on. Now, back to Gus and Neil for more Attorney Confidential.
And we're back with Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. Neil, everything seems to be status quo here. I don't think anything has changed in what we were doing before we went to commercial break.
Yeah, for those of you listening, you can't tell. I mean, if you're watching, you might see a little bit of a different background, and we moved into a different studio, but
we look very
we're still the same people.
We look very comfortable right now. We're completely out of our element, so forgive us for those of
We're
you
lawyers.
watching.
We're trial lawyers. We're used to adjusting at the last minute to something, so that's not a problem. I think we were talking about baseball, wasn't it? Oh, what were we talking about again?
I wouldn't talk about baseball. I'm a soccer guy.
That's right. We're talking about soccer.
We were talking about the interplay of law and morality, and we one of the things we did say was we were going to talk a little bit more about Kennedy's opinion, and Justice Kennedy, and the opinion for the majority in the gay marriage case, and the impact and the basis for it. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, really.
Because I know the first opinion you went to read when your opinion came out was not that of Kennedy's.
I skimmed Kennedy's opinion, and I read Roberts because the legal analysis in Roberts was very intriguing.
Well,
but
let me give you the idiot's version of Kennedy's opinion. Okay.
Well,
Idiot's Guide.
Okay.
Don't say it.
Oh well.
So this is all you need to know about Justice Kennedy's opinion. He basically said, "Look, the right to marriage is a fundamental right." And the laws that have been put in place by these various states try to encroach on that right, try to limit that right, or exclude homosexuals, gay couples from having that right to marry. And so we were not expanding a right. We're just simply taking away a restriction to a fundamental right that everyone should have.
And I think that's the right way to look at it.
Right.
I really do.
So if now you follow that logic, you can see how polygamous and bigamous now.
That's where it's going to be interesting.
So
I mean, in law, we talk
our
about
listeners who don't understand the distinction. Neil, why don't you, as the
As the
resident expert on
yes, because
all things being
I've tried 3 cases in the state of Utah, so I have some knowledge on this issue, although none of them are related to this issue. The polygamy is marrying multiple people at the same time, whereas bigamy is marrying someone after you're already married. I believe is the distinction between the two.
At least that's what Wikipedia says.
That's exactly. That's what I found on Wikipedia. But it is going to be interesting because people have already drawn that conclusion is drawn the analogy, where are you going to draw the line? And in the law, we draw lines all the time. I mean, if we didn't draw lines, then we wouldn't be able to make any decisions. So at some point, you've got to decide where those lines should be drawn. And it'll be interesting to see where the line gets drawn on gay marriage versus does it go to the next step, bigamy, polygamy, and other issues there.
And I've said to you my view, and it's not so much a political, but it's from a legal perspective. I'd rather, there's no perfect law, right? There's no law that doesn't have unintended consequences.
I got to tell you, though, polygamy, I think, does violate the Constitution because it violates the law against cruel and unusual punishment. In that way, I mean, you've heard.
You had me going. That was good.
But I mean, seriously, you've heard of the 3 rings of marriage. I've told you this before. There's the engagement ring, the wedding ring, and the suffer ring. And in
Clarence,
that light,
if you're listening, that was Neil.
Right. No, my wife has heard me tell that joke
before. My
before.
wife's listening. That was not me, and I did not laugh at that.
But notice I didn't indicate which sex. I mean, it could be the female goes through those 3 because they have to be married to someone like me. So, Clarice,
nice
I know
try.
you've gone
nice
through all
try.
3.
Not going to work.
It's
not going to work. But yeah,
I didn't save myself on that one.
The rights of polygamists and bigamists to marry, if you follow just the basic logical argument that the Supreme Court made in a gay marriage opinion, they should also have that similar right. Now, whether you agree with it or not, that's a completely separate issue. You have to be willing to accept some consequences of laws, unintended consequences. It's like saying, do we want to lift up women's sports? Yes, we do. But that may be at the expense of some lesser male sports.
And that's
so
the same.
that's the reality. So if you want to expand the right to people to fundamental right, then you have to be willing to anyone to come in and exercise that right. As long as there's some basic
we have
things.
to decide. I mean, one of the things the legal system does have to do is draw those lines and decide what you should protect and what you shouldn't protect. And with respect to morality, it makes those lines very interesting, and how you draw them and why you draw them. And what we have as lawyers and as judges, the tools we're given to draw those lines are really the Constitution. And that's all we have as a tool. And then we can pass statutes and legislate those issues and try cases and based on those statutes. But the statutes have to fit fundamentally within the Constitution.
And sometimes, a lot of times, some people would argue, depending on your what side of the political aisle you fall under, we're protecting the speech, we're protecting acts that most of us agree are hideous, that most of us agree are just not something we want to support. But in order to have some of the freedoms and liberties that we enjoy, we need to be willing to protect it. So, for example, you were telling me the other day about the story of the KKK.
Oh yeah,
case
I mean,
in Skokie,
it was the Nazi
Illinois.
march in Skokie, Illinois. For those of
the
you that
Nazis,
are
yes.
more my age, Gus, well, I don't know if you were alive. The
No, I
Nazis
was not.
wished to march in Skokie, Illinois. I think it was in the 70s. It might have been the 60s. And they wanted to march. The city of Skokie, Illinois said, no, we're not going to let a group of Nazis march in our city. We have a very high Jewish population. And they fought, the Nazi party fought that on First Amendment grounds. They should have a right to march. And they were actually defended by a Jewish lawyer who felt so strongly that they should have the right, because where do you draw the line? If you're not going to let the Nazis march today, who else doesn't get to march tomorrow? And we do have to protect
Right.
free speech in this country,
Right.
even if you disagree with it. Now, they weren't going to allow violence. There were going to be police present. No one was going to get injured physically. Now, you could get injured emotionally from watching something like that, and I think we all recognize that. But this country prides itself on freedom. And in the very same way, because we pride ourselves on freedom, the decision like the gay marriage one is the proper decision because they should have that right.
And then there are other social issues, going back to the Confederate flag, where the law should not get involved at all. Because the reality is we don't want to legislate every morality that exists out there. It's just the things that affect fundamental rights. If people want to, do some type of campaign to bring down a flag, that's fine. But don't make it illegal to wave that flag and allow people to parade around
Right.
with it if that's what they choose to do.
Swastika is a good example. It's not unlawful in the United States to wave a swastika.
As much as people would like to make that
Exactly.
illegal,
And-
if you make that illegal, the reasoning for making that illegal could then be used to make a lot of other things that the majority doesn't like illegal as well. And so now we're legislating behavior once again.
When you're drawing lines, you have to draw them in a way that there's not that slippery slope, we say. And I would have a hard time figuring out if you're going to ban a flag.
Right.
Where do you draw that line? Where does it next stop? Are we going to now say because we're having war issues with Iran or Iraq, we're going to ban anybody flying those flags in this country? I mean, where do you draw that line? So with respect to a flag, it's a much more difficult line to draw. And if we're not going to ban the swastika, and never have since the 1940s, after we won World War II and revealed the concentration camps, how do we ban the Confederate flag? And I'm not saying I support the Confederate flag. I like the fact that South Carolina took it down. But banning is taking it to, it's the people who want to ban Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn from the library because it uses the N-word. And it's an offensive word. But at the time those books were written, it was a word that was commonly used. So do you ban a piece of fundamental American literature? No. In fact, if we start to ban things like that, we're going to forget in our history that those occurred. And those who forget history are doomed to repeat it.
Oh, nice.
So at some level, you have to have that remembrance. If you start banning the Confederate flag from every cemetery in the South and people forget it ever existed, that's an element of history that you want to remember.
You don't want to
concentration
cleanse
camps.
history. You want to
Exactly.
learn from it, and so let's learn from our history. Let's keep that. Always be mindful of where the law what line the law should get up to. Sometimes we get into morality, but often than not, it should stay away from it, and leave people to handle it the way they want to handle it. Again, it's the Donald Trump. I told you I would sneak in Trump somehow, right? So Donald Trump's been getting a lot of publicity lately for some of the things he's been saying.
And I'm not a Trump supporter, just so that no one thinks I am.
And look, but he has the right to. It's free speech. All that means is that we're not going to put him in jail for saying some things that a lot of people think are idiotic.
And hopefully we're not going to put him in the White House either.
Well,
for things he
that's
says.
what I'm getting to. And private companies have the right, capitalism, to drop him. So and say we don't like what he's talking about. We don't want to associate ourselves with it. That's also exercising their freedom of speech. So free speech, because we get to hear a lot. Well, what free speech? Yeah, free speech just means we're not going to put you in jail for something you said or make it unlawful what you said. Doesn't mean that if you say something idiotic that people aren't going to react to it or they're precluded from reacting to it. No, this is going to have consequences.
Right, and it's the adage. I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes who said that while we protect the free speech
you're getting very
rights,
prophetic today. I tell
I'm in
you.
that mood. I don't know why.
Those who
Is that-
don't learn from history.
No,
are-
I was actually going to quote the other: is that while we protect the right of people to have free speech, we don't protect the right of people to shout fire in a crowded theater. And if it incites a riot, those people might be able. Although it was based on speech, they incited a riot. They were fraudulent. They could be arrested for that. It's just like the Second Amendment's not absolute. While we protect certain weapons, we don't want to protect those weapons that people could only use to open fire in a crowded theater.
Because it's very important to have
But-
a well-trained militia nowadays.
Right. Exactly. So so there are all sorts of rights are not absolute, and we do have to draw those lines.
All right, so we have 2 minutes.
Right.
And while I give you the floor to do the takeaway, I'm also going to need you to pull up the
Right, the
picture,
picture
that I asked you earlier. Because
through our own
my-
technical difficulties,
my,
not our producer's fault. This is our
yes,
fault.
Freddie, we were blaming you for the pictures not
We
coming up.
apologize.
And Neil owes you an
I owe
apology.
Freddie an apology.
But apparently I tried
actually,
sending Freddie the pictures
I'm going to do a
this
different
morning.
takeaway. It's going to be not a takeaway, but it's going to sum up some of the things we've talked about. A few shows ago, I made a joke about Bruce Jenner. And I actually last night watched the ESPY speech.
Oh, you
And
did?
watched the entire program. And Bruce, I know you're not listening, or Caitlin, I know you're not listening, but I apologize. I mean, having watched that history and having watched what you went through, I think you did deserve an award for courage. And with that said, I'll shift the microphone to Gus for your quote of the day.
Neil, I got to tell you, that was almost so good. Almost, I would say, I'm not going to say anything.
No, I mean that's.
But
I
it wasn't
I said to
quite
my
that
wife
good.
last
Let me
night.
turn
that
it on.
Okay.
So this is from Zig Ziglar. For those of you, he's the motivational speaker who said, "There is no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs."
Ooh, I like that quote.
Mhm.
All right. On that note, I think that's the end for today's show. Thank you for listening. You've been listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus Bravo and Neil Kotze, two rated AV trial attorneys with over 40 years of experience. Tune in next week for another episode of entertainment, insight, and just plain fun. That's Monday, 6 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM. See you next Monday for more Attorney Confidential. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers.